Must leave this debate in the knowledge that those who choose to be unconvinced by the existence of miracles will invariably be able to defend their stations and not cede a whit of their position to philosophic argument to the contrary. Or there's a pithy saying from Nancy Gibbs, who said, "For the truly faithful, no miracle is necessary. For those who doubt, no miracle is sufficient." The dominant priority we'll turn down just for a moment of medical. The dominant priority and centrality of purpose for our species is and has always been survival and an extended life preconditioned on a healthy, acceptable quality of life. Enter the physician. Well, it seems appropriate to be reminded of the humbling observation of Voltaire, and this is his quote, that the art of medicine consists in amusing the patient while nature cures the disease. Some of the disorders were mysterious beyond comprehension before medicine became a recognized discipline, were regarded as following in the purview of religion, fulfilling its responsibilities. And the entire history of the transfer of power from cleric to physician is fascinating, but again, beyond the scope of this presentation. I got a feeling Joe is tapping his finger that he wants me to. Not yet. Okay, all right. Medicine and medical training continues to evolve, having already undergone what John Basmajian described as three major revolutions that changed the face of medicine. First one was the surgical revolution. For the first time, that allowed removing and repairing tissues and organs without driving the patient into shock or killing the patient. A revolution made possible by prior discoveries in anesthesia, the need to provide sterile environments, total new instruments, discoveries that rested upon past achievements and prior advances in biology, chemistry, and engineering. The second major revolution that changed the face of medicine was the chemical revolution that promised the world better living through chemistry. Pharmaceuticals, artificial blood and vaccines, plastic veins, and on, were made possible once physics and chemistry solved the basic problems in the understanding and manufacture of such products, at which point the practice of medicine was forever changed and brought benefits to patients that were beyond imagination at an earlier time. The current developments in molecular and ultramolecular biology and genetics are certainly staggering in the potential for applications that medical graduates of 5 years ago would be unable to fathom. And finally, the behavioral revolution, a revolution that is ongoing in our time, where applications from the behavioral laboratories, primarily from the social science laboratories, can be applied by the physician and other health professionals, prominently represented by hypnosis, biofeedback, and conditioning therapies, often without the need for drugs and surgery and their undesired side effects. Behavioral medicine has emerged as a translational science, a relatively modern term that describes the successful application of techniques from the basic science laboratories and life sciences and behavioral sciences to enhance the services performed in the practical arenas of engineering, medicine, and human behavior. Well, we've tried to get a lot of historical key points rather intensely. Whether miracles and medical miracles in particular are creations of fact, faith, or fiction, said differently, our fascination with attempting major clarification by an explication de texte cannot obscure the frustration of being left hanging in midair. We're not really much closer to coming to a satisfying conclusion, certainly for as long as we do not examine some fundamental issues that are in the domains of theology and religion. They hardly prepare us to leave this hall this evening with some concrete bottom-line appreciation of what we can take back with us upon leaving. Let's try to give it a valiant try. Let us return to the scientific evidence supporting the biblical account of splitting of the Red Sea as provided by Colin Humphreys in his book, The Miracle of Exodus. The biblical account actually is more than meets the first casual reading. Here is the key passage. Then Moses stretched his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind, and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided. The Israelites went through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on their right and on their left. The passage can be read two ways. The first is that what happened was a miracle, a suspension of the laws of nature, meaning a type 2 kind of a miracle, right? It was a supernatural event. The water stood literally like a wall. The second is what happened was miraculous, not because the laws of nature were suspended. To the contrary, as the computer simulation shows, the exposure of dry land at a particular point in the Red Sea was a natural outcome of the strong east wind. What made it miraculous is that it happened just there, just then, and just when the Israelites seemed to be trapped, unable to go forward because of the sea, unable to turn back because the Egyptian army was pursuing them. There's a significant difference between these two interpretations. The first appeals to our sense of wonder. How extraordinary that the laws of nature should be suspended to allow an escaping people to go free. It is a story to appeal to the imagination of a child. But the naturalistic explanation, the providential one, the type 1 explanation, is wondrous at another level entirely. Here the Bible is using the device of irony. What made the Egyptians of the time of Ramses so formidable was the fact that they possessed the latest and most powerful form of military technology, the horse-drawn chariot. It made them unbeatable in battle and fearsome. What happens at the sea is poetic justice of the most exquisite kind. There is only one circumstance in which a group of people traveling by foot can escape a highly trained army of charioteers, namely when the route passes through a muddy seabed. The people can walk across, but the chariot wheels get stuck in the mud. The Egyptian army can neither advance nor retreat. The wind stops. The water returns. The powerful are now powerless, while the powerless have made their way to freedom. This, by the way, is reflected minimally in verse 147 of Psalms, dedicated to this event. The elegantly simple way in which the division of the Red Sea is described in the Bible, so that it can be read at two different levels. One is a supernatural miracle. The other is a moral tale about the limits of technology when it comes to the real strength of nation. That is certainly which is most striking. It is a text quite deliberately written so that our understanding of it can deepen as we mature, and we no longer are so much interested in the mechanics of the miracles and more interested in how freedom was won or lost. Well, it's good to know how the division of the sea happened, but there remains a depth to the biblical story that can never be exhausted by computer simulations and other historical or scientific evidence. Just as a physical wind can part waters and expose land beneath, so the human spirit can expose beneath the surface of a story a much deeper meaning beneath. The idea underlying the English word miracle are complex. In the Bible, miracle translates more than one synonym in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. In the New Testament, certain words and actions are called miracles, and the same word is used in English translations of the Old Testament. But in Hebrew, the words translated by miracle are either prodigy or sign or marvel. And in Greek, these events are called by other names, such as an act of power, and most often of all, semeion, a sign. The Latin Bible did not use miraculum for any of these. They were rendered merely as signum, though virtus, mirabilia, prodigia, or portentum were also used. The word miraculum entered Christian vocabulary from another source, from the root mirror, I marvel. I marvel was widely used in classical literature in describing an event that gave rise to this reaction. But the main word used in both Scripture and in the writings of the early church fathers was signa, a sign, stressing theological meaning rather than psychological reaction. For the early church, there is only one miracle, that of creation, with its corollary of recreation by the resurrection. God, they held, created the world out of nothing in 6 days, and within that initial creation, he planted all the possibilities for the future. All creation was, therefore, both natural and miraculous, everyday events. The birth of children, the growth of plants, rainfall were all daily miracles, signs of the mysterious creative power of God at work in the universe. But it was always possible that people would become so accustomed to these daily miracles that they would no longer be moved to be in awe by them, and they would need to be provoked to reverence by unusual manifestations of God's power. Such events were also within the original creation, hidden within the nature and appearance of things, which at times caused miracles that seemed to be contrary to nature, but were in fact inherent in it. The most usual channel for these hidden causes was the prayer of the saints, living and dead, through whom the recreation was revealed. Evidence happened in nature or miraculously, but both were equally the work of God. To pose only the question, how does this happen, to any event need not exclude the other question, the older question, why does this happen? What does it mean? I'm almost finished. I don't know whether you represent them or that's your opinion. No. Okay. Lord Jonathan Sacks, the chief rabbi of the UK, offers some insightful interpretations on this issue of the Red Sea as it is presented in the biblical text, and his sermonic message may be appropriately fitting as we enter now this first quarter of the current calendar year, and we begin by preparing resolutions and making all kinds of predictions of not only the stock market, but what else we expect to occur during our fortunate new year. Probably the safest prediction is that tomorrow never knows. And Sacks himself made the point. He says, my prediction, which I make with total confidence, is that total confidence in predictions is never warranted. They turn out more often than not to be wrong. And he cites several examples which to him represents the epitome of wrong predictions. Here are some of his favorites. Quote, heavier than air-flying machines are impossible, said Lord Kelvin, president of the Royal Society in 1895. Or another quote, much closer to our time. There is no reason anyone would want a computer in their home, said Ken Olsen, president and founder of Digital Equipment, a major maker of computer mainframes in the 70s. Or an earlier one, quote, everything that can be invented has been invented, said an official at the U.S. Patent Office in 1899. And finally, interestingly enough, Charles Darwin wrote in the foreword to The Origin of the Species, I see no good reasons why the views given in this volume should shock the religious sensibilities of anyone. Despite the many political experts, research institutes, think tanks, government, university departments, nobody could foresee the bloodless end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union. Few foresaw the possibility of a terrorist attack that changed our world. Bernard Lewis, the scholar of Islam, was asked to predict the outcome of a certain American foreign policy intervention, and he gave a magnificent reply. He said, I'm a historian, so I only make predictions about the past. What is more, he said, I am a retired historian, so even my past is passé. We know so much at a macro and a micro level. We look up and we see a universe of hundreds of billions of galaxies, and each 100 billion stars. We look down and we see a human body containing 100 trillion cells, each with a double copy of the human genome. 3.1 billion letters long, which if transcribed would be enough to fill